looking at Mother's Day, there's only a set number of scriptures that we could look at, and so I chose Matthew 20 through 22 as our Mother's Day text to look at mothers. And to be honest, I couldn't find any Mother's Day sermons that was using this text, because sometimes this is one that says maybe this wasn't the best mother, but I want to give you a different look at it. As most preachers do, this last week I read through quite a few heartwarming stories about mothers who express their love for their children in very small, everyday, seemingly insignificant kinds of ways that ended up impacting their children for life in, well, a very good sort of way. One story was from a woman who told how her mother always held her hand whenever they went somewhere. She just reached down and grabbed hold of her daughter's hand, and she said it always made me feel safe. It never mattered where we went. She included a picture of her and her mother walking away from whoever it was that took the picture, and they were walking toward an airplane that was on a tarmac with where you could walk up into the plane for those to board. She said she was just a little girl. It was her first airplane ride. She was really excited and she was really scared. But her mother's reassuring hold on her hand not only got her onto that plane, but she said it helped prepare her to step out boldly to bigger and better things her entire life. He says, I know my mom wasn't trying to do that when she held my hand, but that's one of the things that she taught me. So now I'm willing to step out even when she's not around to hold my hand. Another was from a man who recalled how he'd been given this bright red tricycle. And what he really wanted to do was to ride it over to his grandmother's house and show it off, who just lived up the street from them. Only that street was actually a rural highway in which cars sped down. His mom was getting his brother ready, and well, he was a little impatient. He just couldn't wait, so he just took off without him. He was already on the road when he saw the car speeding toward him. His mother was already running down the gravel as fast as she could, but she would arrive too late. Unfortunately, fortunately, it was a neighbor who knew about the kids who lived there, and so he saw and hit his brakes. The sound the car made coming to a stop, he said, scared him half to death, because it just seemed to have stopped just inches from where he was at. He had been warned, of course, not to be on the road alone. When his mother got there, she scooped him up in her arms, and the first thing he remembers her saying was, "Why didn't you wait for us?" Of course, what kind of an answer are you going to give to that? I mean, what could he have said? But he did recall how she squeezed him tightly against her chest, and then put him back on the tricycle. They thanked the neighbor who'd gotten out of the car. They went back to the house. They got his brother, and then the three of them made his way to his grandmother's house, where he was able to show off his new tricycle. He said that his mother never really punished him for what he had done, but that experience made him more responsive to her rules. Of course, he broke quite a few of them as he grew up, and as he had on that day, each time he learned a lesson, something that reinforced that those rules were just another way that his mother was looking out for his safety, wanting the best for him, even though he may not see the danger that she could see. He said those rules trained him well to, what he said was, to look before I leap, even though she was no longer around to make up rules for him. He's been making up rules for himself in the same way his mother would look out for him. It's a good thing to have a good mother. And it seems that mothers, at least the good ones, really do want what is best for their children. And the mother of James and John were no different. While her sons are referred to as the sons of Zebedee, her husband, they left his fishing business to follow Jesus. In their new identity, that is, they quickly became known as Jesus' disciples. They were among the first three to be chosen by Jesus along with Peter. And these three ended up sharing some unique experiences with Jesus that the other disciples wouldn't get to experience. like the raising of Jairus' daughter from the dead and the Lord's transfiguration when he met with Moses and Elijah in his agony in the garden. John would become known as the disciple whom Jesus loved. But before he was known that way, Jesus would nickname these two brothers the sons of thunder because they got so upset with some people who lived in a village who refused them a place to stay as they passed through on their way to Jerusalem, that these two brothers wanted to call down lightning from heaven to teach that village a lesson. But they, like the other disciples, were taught a better way to respond than to taking offense or overreacting, or letting an outburst of anger guide your actions. He taught them how to respond in love. These two brothers would both be commissioned by Jesus as apostles, a Greek word that means one who is sent. And they would be sent into the world by Jesus to go and make disciples of all nations. That's exactly what they did. While John would have more time to make disciples because he was the last apostle to die, and the only one to die peacefully, probably shortly after 98 AD, James would be the first apostle to be martyred, and his death is recorded in Acts 12, verse 2, which probably took place around 44 AD, a long difference between their lifespans. Any good mother would do as this one did. Their mother seems to have kept track of her sons as they followed Jesus and learned from him, and even to provide for them when they came back near where she lived. It appears that she was also led to the truth about Jesus, and I like to think that her sons had a hand in it whenever they were in one of those near visits. Most Bible scholars identify their mother as Salome, who was among the women who went with Mary whenever she found Jesus' tomb empty. They make that identification by comparing Matthew 27, verse 61, and Mark, the 14th chapter, verse 40. That's a very compelling case when you put those two together, and you should take a look at those verses and make that comparison for yourself. If she was Salome, it means that she would have been one of the first people to believe in Jesus' resurrection, even before her sons, James and John. Salome's request on this occasion revealed her complete faith that Jesus would bring about his kingdom, even if she didn't quite understand the true nature of that kingdom. She, like so many of those following Jesus around, even his disciples, still thought of that kingdom in national terms, imagining Jesus as a new king with his disciples becoming his ruling council on a day whenever they would overthrow and replace King Herod. Part of the reason that Salome didn't fully understand the nature of Jesus' kingdom is because Jesus had taken his 12 disciples, which would include James and John, aside by themselves, separate from everyone else, to tell them exactly what was about to happen to them when they entered Jerusalem, the true nature of his kingdom. He told them, "Behold, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. And he will be handed over to the Gentiles to be mocked and scourged and crucified. But on the third day he will be raised up." Despite his transparency, not even the disciples themselves seem to have accepted or understood how that series of events would usher in Jesus' kingdom. They were still a little bit confused. I mean, how could he be the next king if he was going to die? And what kind of resurrection was he talking about? It was probably the same sort of confusion that Mary and Martha expressed whenever Jesus said that he would raise their brother Lazarus from the dead, which you can read about in John the 11th chapter, and how Jesus tried to explain to them that he was talking about a resurrection here and now, and not just the final day resurrection. Still, these disciples continued to follow Jesus, trusting him to do what he had revealed to them, even if they didn't quite fully understand it. Sometimes we do the same, following Jesus, even though we don't fully understand everything. We trust that his way is the right way, the best way. It may have been that Salome was among those listening when Jesus revealed to all those who were following him, not just the 12, what those 12 could expect whenever his kingdom did come. He told them, "At the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. For everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. But to many who are first, they will be last, and many who are last will be first." If she was there among that crowd, then the idea of her sons being a part of Jesus' governing council would certainly have occurred to her and even been confirmed that this was their future. She would naturally hope that they would sit near Jesus when that time came. After all, those on Jesus' left and right would be judging perhaps from the best thrones that were going to be available. What mother wouldn't want their sons to have the best seat in the house? Her request also revealed that Salome fully believed that her sons were ready and worthy of being on Jesus' right and left when he came into his kingdom. She had seen them grow. They were no longer the boys helping out their father in his business. They were the young men who had been following Jesus for 3 years, men who had been growing, men who had been changing, men who'd been letting down their old nature and taking up their new ones, no longer the sons of thunders, but the apostles of love. It's the sort of thing that every mother hopes to see in their children, seeing them grow up in the Lord. But her request revealed most of all that she was doing what every good mother does, seeking the best for her children. Now, most studies about Salome's request focus on Jesus' response that the thrones to his right and left were not his to appoint, or how the other disciples took offense at her boldness for asking that Jesus reserve these places for James and John, or how Jesus turned that moment into, a teachable moment on how those who follow him must learn to serve rather than be served. But today I want us to consider Salome's desire for what was best, or at least what she thought was best, for her 2 boys. A mother's earnest desire for her children to succeed is in some way sort of a core belief for us, which is why we recoil when we read about reports of mothers who did not seek what was best for their children. Especially those where we read about in the news about mothers who abandon their children or abuse them or sell them into the sex trade or even kill them. When I read stories like that, it makes me wonder, how could a mother ever do that? Because I want mothers to be those loving women who want the very best for their children. I know that not all mothers do what is best for their children. I know that those who had such a mother struggle with this day that we set aside to honor mothers who did. Mother's Day brings to surface just as many sorrows for people as it does joys, because the relationship with their mother or mother's relationship with their children are sometimes broken by sin. It's one of the things that we want to see restored with Jesus' way of life. Which means that one thing for a child to honor a mother is one thing. And it's quite different whenever we get a little older and honor them whenever they're in their old age. Jesus addressed this, saying, yes, we really do need to take care of them. If you recall, it was to John, one of these 2 brothers, that Jesus entrusted the care of his own mother. I don't think Jesus would have done that unless he was probably taking care of Salome. Despite how our mothers have treated us, we, as those who follow Jesus, must respond to them in love and care for them. We need to know how to honor them and love them. Yesterday, I got to visit Marcy's mother. If you don't know, she's been suffering with Alzheimer's and declining to the point that her mentality is just not what it was, and it's hard to watch. I just made a quick visit. I took over a chocolate milkshake for her. I held her hand. I showed her some pictures on the phone of her grandkids. I told her, hey, we all love you. And she was in and out, so she didn't really respond to me kind of in sync. But she sort of perked up and she looked at me and she said, you know, I am lucky to have children who love me. I want to say it again. Salome's request for her sons should not have come as a surprise to any of us. She was just doing what we would expect a mother to do. She wanted the best for her children. She was proud of them. She stood up for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. I believe that most modern mothers probably follow in her footsteps more than they realize. Just Google a mother's prayer, and you'll find plenty of examples of mothers asking Jesus to give their children what they think is best for them. And I believe that this is a very good thing. I think it's probably how my own mother prays for me. Believing mothers should ask Jesus to bring about what they feel is best for their children. What else would we expect them to do? If you recall, it was the Syrophoenician mother who approached Jesus to heal her daughter, and he refused. He said, no, I'm here to take care of the children of Israel. But she persisted, and she said, even the dogs get the crumbs under the table. And Jesus marveled at her faith, her motherly desire for what was best for her daughter, and he healed her daughter. You know, even a mother like Salome, who didn't fully understand what she was asking of Jesus, was really in her spirit wanting what was best for her boys. You may recall from other studies we've had together that the Greek term most often translated prayer in English is the Greek term pros eukomai, pros tor, good, kamai, to have, a word that literally means to want good toward. That's what prayer means, to want good toward. And what Christian mother doesn't want what is good for their children? Their prayers were part of their life. There wasn't really a specific prayer on the internet that I got caught with my attention on, but I found something interesting on a website called Alamos. They evaluated a lot of data given by mothers who are willing to share what they really wanted for their children, and they came to the conclusion that a mother wants a combination of the following 10 things for their children. That they want emotional, physical, and spiritual health for their children. They want them to have a passion for learning. They want them to have good friends. They want them to experience joy. They want them to have a purpose in life. They want them to have wisdom and to use it. They want them to have the hope of eternity. And they want them to be a person of love. I think that Salome's request of Jesus exhibits some of those things, if not all of them. However, if Imam and what they suggest is really all that a mother wants for her children, it made me wonder, if Salome fully understood where following Jesus would lead her sons, would she want them to keep walking in his footsteps? I want to think the best of Salome, so I like to think that she would have done so. For following Jesus really is the best thing that any child could do. Not only is it the only path to heaven, but it leads a child down a path of experience the very best this life has to offer. Even if doing so brings about some things that I don't think any mother would pray for their children to experience. Sometimes following Jesus, the best life that we get led into, brings about suffering for his namesake. It brings about persecution and opposition. It brings about banishment. And it can even bring about a martyr's death. James and John experienced all of those things. They could have chosen a different path. to avoid most of those kinds of things, but instead they chose to follow Jesus, and I think Salome supported that 100%. In Mark's version of Salome's request, chapter 10 of his gospel, James and John told Jesus, as we find in the Airs, that they were willing to follow him, that they could do what he was requesting of. In ours it says, could you drink from the cup that I drink from? But in Mark's version it says, could you be baptized with the same baptism that I'm going to be baptized with? Jesus, of course, had already been baptized in the way we normally think about baptism, and he was using this term to talk about his own suffering and his own death, which water baptism does symbolize as we go into that watery grave. And he was also talking about his coming resurrection from the dead, which is also expressed in water baptism when we come up out of the water. When you think about it, the spirit of Salome's request, her prayer, was granted by Jesus. James and John would receive the very best, but they would experience suffering. They would go through the kind of baptism, drink from the kind of cup that Jesus went through, and they would experience resurrection. So I guess really at the heart of our prayers, even a mother's prayer who wants the very best for their children, since we don't always understand the ramifications, the heart of our prayer, the spirit of our prayer, and I think the spirit of her prayer, is to say, not my will, not my understanding of things, but yours be done. For there's nothing better for which a mother could ask God than for God's will to be done in the life of their children. It is this desire, which is expressed in how mothers care for their children, that compel us to honor them. And we do so today. We're going to have a hymn of invitation. If you are longing for the kind of experience that God brings about when his will is done, we invite you to join him. If you've never given your life to him, we invite you, as Paul would say in Romans the 6th chapter, to unite yourself with Christ in his death, burial, and resurrection, that you might live with him forever. As before we stand, would you join me in prayer? Lord Jesus, we thank you for inspiring mothers to seek what is best for their children. And may what they do based upon this beautiful expression of their love for their children always lead them closer to you in all things.